Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to the second part of our two-part series about feuds between neighbors that ended in tragedy. If you haven't seen part 1, be sure to check that out first. We'll leave a link in the description below. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this. It really helps us to continue building the channel. With that out of the way, here is part 2 of 2 feuds between neighbors that ended in tragedy. At the start of 2018, 27-year-old Laura Sugden and 30-year-old Shane Gilmer were excited about their future together. They had been dating for 2 years, and now that Laura was several months pregnant with their first child, were thinking about getting married. However, less than 2 weeks into the new year, the dreams of the madly in love couple would be forever destroyed, when ongoing problems with a neighbor escalated into a violent tragedy. Laura and Shane met while working as housing officers for the East Riding Council in Yorkshire, England. Shane was particularly passionate about his job there, and according to both his colleagues and supervisors, worked tirelessly to help people who were homeless or in need of accommodation find their own places. The fact that Shane and Laura were both colleagues and romantic partners meant that they rarely spent time apart. It was the kind of situation that could have caused tension between the wrong people, but for them, it worked well. Laura would later say that the honeymoon period in their relationship never went away. Soon, the couple had started living together as well, when Shane moved in with Laura and her daughter from a previous relationship into the semi-detached cottage property Laura rented in Southburn. Southburn is a tiny town in Yorkshire, just a few miles away from Driffield, and not too far from the northeast coast of England. The sleepy town consists of about 20 homes, and not too much else. Surrounded by farmland, it's mostly devoid even of the small pubs and shops that are characteristic of small English towns. Because of the wide open spaces, you wouldn't think that Southburn would be the kind of place where you would have to worry about bad neighbors, and for the most part, you'd be right. But Laura and Shane's situation was sort of unique. Because they lived in the semi-detached cottage, they did have one neighbor living in their immediate vicinity, a 55-year-old man named Anthony Lawrence. When Laura began renting the cottage in 2014, Lawrence was already there. He mostly kept to himself and had a reputation as a loner amongst the local residents. When Laura first moved in, she felt sorry for Lawrence. It seemed like he spent most of his time cooped up inside, rarely venturing out for more than an hour at a time. He wasn't chatty, but he wasn't exactly unfriendly towards her either. The only conversation that he had seemed genuinely interested in had been when he asked her about how much rent she was paying, presumably to figure out if he was being overcharged. However, by the time that Shane moved in, Lawrence had become a bit of a persistent nuisance. In particular, he liked to play loud music late into the night, which was audible through their shared wall. Initially wanting to spare themselves any sort of conflict, the couple avoided saying anything to Lawrence unless they really had to, like in situations where it was preventing them and Laura's daughter Isabel from sleeping. Still, no matter how polite they were or how many times they told Lawrence to just not play the music past a certain time, the incidents kept happening with increasing frequency. Things were exacerbated further when Shane and Laura began to notice an extremely strong odor of marijuana in Isabel's room that seemed to be seeping through the walls. The odor was far too powerful to be just the result of Lawrence smoking indoors, and the pair began to suspect that their next-door neighbor was actually running a growing operation out of his apartment. Laura was especially concerned because of Isabel's asthma, which she would later say was being agitated by the fumes. In January of 2017, things escalated significantly between the neighbors, when one night, Shane went over to Lawrence's house to tell him to turn his music down. They had already had a conversation about the music earlier in the evening. But again, not wanting to escalate things, Shane and Laura had decided not to say anything to Lawrence again until they were actually ready to go to bed. Shane tapped on the window of the man's apartment, and Lawrence motioned him to the back door. Thinking nothing of it, Shane walked around, only to be confronted by Lawrence holding an axe. The irate man then launched into a tirade of threats against Shane and Laura, cursing at them and saying he was going to kill them. Though Lawrence never actually tried to assault either of them with the axe, it was enough for Shane to call the police. While it's doubtful that police would have been able to do much anyway given the lack of evidence, amazingly, when Shane made the report, he again attempted to avoid conflict with Lawrence, stressing to officers that he didn't want to take further action, but that he wanted the incident to be on record in case anything else happened. Eventually, Shane and Laura did contact the police about their suspicions that Lawrence was growing marijuana in his house, but they were told that this was not enough for them to be able to legally search the property. Increasingly concerned about her daughter's asthma, Laura instead decided to take the complaint to the agent in charge of managing the cottage property for their landlord. The agent arranged a visit to the house, and though she found no hard evidence of a grow-op in Lawrence's apartment, she did notice that the room that shared a wall with Isabel's room had a particularly pungent odor. It seemed like someone had tried to cover up the smell with powerful cleaning chemicals. The visit was enough for the agent to arrange for Lawrence to be evicted from the property, and he received a notice in December of 2017. In order to protect Shane and Laura from any potential hostility, Lawrence was told that his rental agreement was not being renewed for 2018 because they needed to do renovations on the cottage. However, little did anyone know at the time, Lawrence was well aware of Shane and Laura's role in his eviction. He had purchased a listening device more than a year earlier and had spent the past few months spying on the couple through their shared wall. Ahead of Lawrence's move-out date, there were no real open hostilities between the neighbors, though Shane and Laura found horse manure in their garden and on their driveway on 2 separate occasions. Whether they made the connection that Lawrence was responsible or not is unclear, but if they did, they chose not to address it with him directly. After all, they likely figured that they would be rid of Lawrence in just a few short weeks. Everything seemed fine until the night of January 12th, 2018. That Friday evening, Shane and Laura had the house to themselves and decided to go out for a date night at an Italian restaurant in Hull, about a 30-minute drive away. The couple returned home from their romantic dinner just after 9 p.m. and planned to spend the rest of the night relaxing and watching TV. However, when Laura went upstairs, she noticed something strange. There was a mark on the cream carpet flooring, but she knew that neither she or Shane had tracked dirt inside the house. The mark was just below the hatch leading up to the attic. Feeling uneasy, Laura first went into her and Shane's bedroom, before coming out and going to check her daughter's room as well. As she slowly pushed the door open, she came face to face with Anthony Lawrence, who was holding a crossbow. Lawrence quickly forced her back into the bedroom, and she began to scream. The terrifying commotion caused Shane to run upstairs to see what was wrong. Before he could react to the situation, Lawrence shot Shane with one of the bolts from the crossbow, which went through his arm, continuing through his body and damaging several organs until it got lodged in his spinal column. The horrifying wound caused Shane to become incapacitated, at which point Lawrence returned to the room where Laura was. When Laura pleaded with Lawrence not to hurt them, saying that she was pregnant, he began to scream at her that he had been listening to them, and that he knew that they had gotten him evicted. Laura said that she would call both the landlord and the police and say that they had made everything up, but Lawrence continued the attack, shooting Laura with another bolt in the top of her head. Laura managed to pull the bolt out while Lawrence attempted to reload, and proceeded to try and attack him with it. In the ensuing struggle, Lawrence managed to get the bolt away from Laura and used it to further attack her neck and throat. After that, Lawrence disappeared. Laura ran to help Shane, but he was worried that their attacker was still in the house. He insisted that Laura needed to get out to find help for her and the baby. Despite her injuries, she managed to run more than 200 meters to the next closest house, where she was given first aid, and police and emergency service workers were called. At the same time that this was happening, Shane managed to drag himself to the nearest phone and also call police. In excruciating pain and knowing that he was quickly fading, Shane told authorities all he could about what had happened, and said to tell his family that he loved them. Terrified that Lawrence had managed to find Laura as she ran for help, he also continued to insist that they find her before coming to help him. Due to both the remote location of the house and the fact that Lawrence could still be armed and dangerous in the area, it took help several minutes longer than usual to arrive to tend to Shane. By that time, his condition was extremely dire, though he was able to remain conscious long enough to be told that Laura was safe and had been taken to the hospital. Sadly, Shane went into cardiac arrest not long after arriving at the hospital himself, and died the next morning. However, Laura's life and the life of her unborn baby were able to be saved. For the next 2 days, the normally quiet town of Southburn was swarming with police and canine units as authorities worked to track down Anthony Lawrence. The town remained locked down until the morning of January 14th, when Lawrence's body was found inside of a camper van in a remote area of northern Yorkshire. He had died of a fatal overdose of painkillers. Though the tragic case received widespread coverage in the UK at the time it took place, it would take more than 3 years for many of the details of the crime to be released to the public, when an inquest was held in April of 2021. Aside from the revelation of the listening device that Lawrence had used to spy on Laura and Shane for months leading up to the attack, perhaps the most chilling detail to be released was how he had managed to get into their house undetected. Lawrence had removed bricks from the shared wall in their attic, making a hole large enough that he could crawl through. On the night of the attack, he had gone through and laid in wait for them until they came home. However, these were far from the only details that showed the considerable forethought that Lawrence had put into the brutal crime. He had rented the camper van that he was eventually found in several days before the attack, and was seen burning unknown paperwork in a metal bin outside of the cottage. He also augmented the bolts he used in the attack to make them more lethal, though sources do not specify exactly how he did this. According to Lawrence's sister, he told her that he would be going to Thailand, and asked her to take care of his dog, though there's no evidence that he ever bought a plane ticket. The inquest ultimately decided that Shane had been killed unlawfully, and that if Lawrence were still alive, he would have been charged with murder and attempted murder. Following the inquest, Laura Sugden called for greater regulations on crossbows, saying that there needed to be systems in place to stop twisted and dangerous individuals like Lawrence from getting their hands on them. Laura and Shane's daughter Ella was born in August of 2018, and the most recent reports we could find say that she is healthy and happy. Laura says that she is still in love with Shane and traumatized by what happened, but that their daughter has helped to heal her heart somewhat in the years since. Do you know of any other cases like this that you think we should check out? Tell us about them in the comments section below. As always, if you enjoyed our video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. Thank you for watching.